Hello, and I think we're live now.
The Zay Initiative, an ode to the past, a nod to the future, a collection of Arab dress and adornment, celebrating human narrative.
Welcome to our host for today, Ben Evans, Editor-in-Chief and Managing Director, Harley Publications.
Good afternoon, morning, and indeed evening, I think, probably to everyone attending today. Welcome to the inaugural Arab Costume Collections Sustaining Legacies Symposium. As you've just heard, my name is Ben Evans. I'm the editor and managing director of Harley Publications, based in London, and I will be acting as your host for today's symposium. I'm honoured to be hosting on behalf of the Zay Initiative, which is an important and dynamic organisation that advances the preservation of cultural heritage through collecting, documenting, digitising and publicising Arab historical dress. And today we will be covering two key topics that are of concern and interest to us in today's environment, in the form of two panel discussions. The first, the importance of Arab dress and culture, and the second, the role and relevance of heritage for contemporary brands. Now, we encourage you to use the chat function, which I think you'll find at the bottom of the screen. I mean, for me, at least, it's under my chin currently, because we will have a 10-minute Q&A with our speakers at the end of each panel discussion. So please add your questions to the Q&A function in Zoom, and hopefully you can take part in the discussion at the end. I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panel moderator, Dr. Gillian Vogelzang-Eastwood, Director of the excellent Textile Research Centre in Leiden, the Netherlands. Professional textile and dress historian with a PhD from Manchester University. She has also worked as a textile archaeologist in the Middle East for many years. Now, Dr. Eastwood is the author of numerous books and articles on the subject of textiles and dress, and the main editor and author of the Bloomsbury series, The Encyclopedia of Embroidery, which appropriately enough also includes the Encyclopedia of Embroidery from the Arab world. So I will hand you over to Dr. Vogelzang-Eastwood to start the first of our panel discussions. I hope you will enjoy it.
Thank you, Ben. As said, my name is Gillian Vogelzang-Eastwood, and I'm the director of the Textile Research Centre here in the Netherlands. And I have the great honour of introducing you to our expert panellists in the first session to discuss the importance of Arab dress and culture. Joining me are Richard Wilding, a trustee of Monsurat, a charity formed by a group of Saudi women to preserve and document the traditional costumes of Saudi Arabia. In 2016, Richard produced a film with Monsurat about the costumes and heritage of Saudi Arabia, and he has recently co-edited the book Traditional Costumes of Saudi Arabia, published by ACC Art Books in 2021. Shahira Mehnaz, collector, author, and expert on ethnic costumes and creative advisor to the Zay Initiative, and a lifelong supporter of Middle Eastern arts. She began collecting and archiving Egyptian peasant dresses as a teenager, so she has a wide range of experience and knowledge. She holds a master's degree in Islamic art and runs El Arish, a Sinai-based women's collective that produces hand-embroidered Bedouin pieces. And of course, Dr. Reem El-Madwali, founder of the Zay Initiative, and is a published author and lead curator and public speaker. She has over 30 years of experience and is an expert consultant in Islamic art and architecture, interior design, historic dress, and UAE heritage in particular. As Ben noted, we will be having a discussion on this important topic, and we'll then be taking questions at the end of the session. A key word that has been highlighted over the last year or so is sustainability. And in this case, the sustainability of culture and traditions in a world that is rapidly changing and more quickly, especially thanks to technological changes and mass communication, than has ever before in the history of human beings. And it has a significant influence on Arab dress and culture. And in fact, culture throughout the world. This is becoming a more and more important topic. We had a wide range of themes possible, but it would have taken several days to reflect on all of the potential points, ideas, and questions. So we decided on 3 main subjects or subsections: traditional forms, general, collecting and documenting, and public awareness. So I'd like to start off with the first one, traditional forms in general, with Shahira. The perception of regional dress versus fashion, including the advantages of traditional costume. Shahira, your thoughts on this matter, please.
Well, I have to tell you that I have a bit of a problem because I think in our part of the world, and particularly in Egypt, the fashions have completely, if you want, liquidated traditional costumes. So, and this is, I'm speaking mainly about Egypt, but I think what I'm saying is also valid for Syria and partly for Iraq. It is not always valid for the Arab Gulf, because I think that men in the Arab Gulf have managed to keep both traditions. So we can see the same prince or gentleman dressed in a tuxedo once, and once in his traditional abaya or dishdasha or whatever it is. But in the case of women, I think it is a very, very big problem, because women, to think of themselves or being elegant, have to wear a Western costume. And I think this is a betrayal of a tradition. I don't mean that we don't have the right to wear Western fashions, but one of the best examples is in India, where you can have a person wearing one time, again, a very fashionable dress made by a designer somewhere in the Western world, as well as wearing a sari and being also knowledgeable about that traditional costume. While in my case, for example, in Egypt, if I ever dressed a little girl at a costume ball in one of the traditional costumes, I might have a comment like, how beautiful the Mexican costume. So this is really a dramatic thing, because I think we need people to be more interested and to be more proud of their traditions, because our traditions have started thousands of years ago, and throughout the ages have managed to develop and change, and every time have been able to adapt to the timing, except starting from the 19th century, where we shed our skin and we became Westerners.
Richard, your thoughts?
Yes, I think this is very true. I think from my perspective, working with traditional costume in Saudi Arabia, I think one of the very sad things is that traditional costumes have really become a luxury. They've almost completely disappeared from daily life. You don't find costumes with traditional materials and in traditional styles being worn by everyday people, as used to be the case until a few decades ago. Thankfully, there has been some revival in women wearing traditional styles of costumes for special events, but they tend to be from the wealthier parts of society, and these are not really accessible to everyday people, and I think that's a great pity.
And can I comment about one thing that Richard has said? That I'll be very brief.
Yes, of course.
I think that, Richard, that what you have is maybe something I'm dreaming of having in Egypt, because in Egypt it is the elites that refuse to wear anything traditional. They think it is being backward and underdeveloped and cheap. So, of course, the elites are copied by the majority of the people. So already you might have the nucleus of a good thing in countries where the elites can afford and can wear, because hopefully it can, seep through from up down.
Mm.
Mm.
What about in the Gulf region? We've just heard about Saudi Arabia. How do you feel? Is it being supported?
Actually, in the United Arab Emirates in particular, national dress has been part and parcel of the pride, national pride here. And both men and women continue to wear it, although I must concur with Sid Shahira that most of the women are beginning to wear Western style of clothing. However, they have been managing to adapt their outer cloak, which is their abaya, the public cloak that they wear outside. They are adapting it to the needs and functions that are required in today's lifestyle. The traditional dress continues to be worn continuously in socially and among and during festivities and so on and so forth. And yes, the ruling family continue to wear it, especially Al Nahyan in Abu Dhabi. They continue to dress in this format, and it is trickling from them down to the other social classes, as Sid Shahira just mentioned. But also you see it in Morocco. Moroccans have been very, very adamant about keeping their traditional dress. They continue to wear it, be it their royalty as well as their normal and different echelons of society. They continue to wear that. So we are seeing the two of them happening. But I think the advent of technology nowadays has helped in the fact that it is allowing young designers and young creatives to be inspired by their culture and start using that information in order to design new material that is being used and produced by them. So it's a good sign in a way.
Yeah. One of the subjects that I'm particularly interested in, I must admit, is preserving traditional textile crafts. And Richard, you mentioned that local textiles, traditional textiles, are now getting very expensive. The other side of that problem, surely, is nobody or very few people are actually still producing them.
Mm.
How can we revive this?
I think that a lot of the traditional crafts involved in making costumes almost died out completely. Looking at, for instance, bead making, silver bead making in Saudi Arabia, there were a few women still making beads in the traditional way. And thankfully, some of the changes that are now taking place in Saudi Arabia mean that there is a revival in interest in these crafts, and they are being supported through ministry events, and especially with the push towards tourism, these are now seen as key attractions. So over the past few years, it's been quite amazing to see a turnaround in interest from the authorities in traditional crafts. So I do think that we may just have managed to stop these crafts from dying out before a renewal in interest took place. So that there is definitely an improvement.
Can I make a comment in Egypt? Unfortunately, all of the traditional fabrics, threads, and natural dyes, and people producing them have completely disappeared. So even if somebody wants to reproduce, they have to go to industrially produced materials that do not at all compare in the effect they produce. And unfortunately, these also are getting to be very, very rare, because as we were talking now about elites encouraging crafts like in Morocco, I think that the case of Morocco is interesting because royal families often protected, if you want, the tradition, because they related to the previous dynasties that ruled the country. But in our case, for example, in the 19th century, our rulers, whom I'm very proud of, and I think they have introduced Egypt to the 19th century and the 20th century. They've modernized Egypt and made the base for modern Egypt, were not related to our traditional costumes, and therefore abandoned the costume for a Turkish costume. And the Turkish costume, in a way, was abandoned in the beginning of the 20th century for Western costume. So sometimes, as I say, the elites can help. The elites if the elites do not help, they don't survive. But unfortunately, whenever we tried in any part of Egypt to revive a craft, the fact that we had lost the original fabrics made the result look a bit pastiche, a bit cheap, not exactly the same.
Yeah.
The same concern we're beginning to have here as well. As much as a lot of effort is being put into continuing the craft traditions or the traditional crafts of the area, I think it is important that we are watchful to the fact that we need to go back and document and study the traditional ways of making these products before introducing the international, because the market is so saturated with material that is coming from East and West, and they are using new materials to create the old crafts. And those people who are of an age where they are disappearing slowly because of their age, who know the knowledge, the old knowledge, are going away, and it is not carried forward to the next generation. Although I must say there are many efforts to counteract this situation.
What sort of measures have been taken?
A few of the institutions in the UAE, like ERTHI, which is one of the top institutions, has been involved in researching and working on, for example, teli making or the sififa or the different elements of traditional craft. And they have been trying to record and introduce young designers to have them work together with the older generation that has knowledge of the old craft and be able to carry it forward. So they are making some efforts into that.
Shahir.
A little comment about Egypt, about young designers. Unfortunately, young designers in Egypt do not really go to any kind of proper documentation. They don't visit museums, and sometimes when they visit, the museums don't have the proper description or the proper for them.
That is a point we'll come back to in a few minutes, documentation and collecting.
Yes.
Okay.
But it was more, the question at the moment is, what incentive is there to keep the old crafts going? Because basically it's financial incentives are the driving forces of many elements of this. So are in international bodies, funding income generation groups who are active in the Arab world, are they actually helping or hindering?
I think in my case, I find they are hindering because they are not documenting properly or making sure that the people whom they are helping or funding have done a proper documentation. And this is very clear in the case of the teli, when the teli was in a way encouraged by different kind of funding institutions in the mid-20th century. They didn't research the old tradition. Teli can go back to the 10th century. We don't have the examples of the 10th century, but we have a lot of examples that are reproducing from the 13th and 14th century embroideries that in the 19th and 20th century were done in teli. But these were not at all surveyed or studied, and they simply copied the commercial production that started at the end of the 19th century with the Chicago Fair, where I think people from Asyut exported shawls. And from that time onward, the tali came to be named as Asyut, which is not at all correct because it was made in many centers throughout Egypt, from Upper Egypt down to Alexandria. And unfortunately, it has become, if you weigh what they copied at in the revival period of the 20th century when they tried to revive the craft, is the commercial production of the end of the 19th century, not the very beautiful one that has been existing for more than 1,000 years.
Yeah. What's happening in Saudi Arabia, Richard?
Well, going back to my example of the silver bead making, I think really money is the most important factor. Now that can be both negative and positive. I think that if one looks at a product like silver beads, which are very important components in many of the Saudi costumes, you have headdresses which are literally covered with patterns of silver beads. One of the reasons why the traditional bead making was under threat was because of the introduction of machine-made beads. Now, these are obviously much cheaper, but they are much cruder in their construction. They're square and very rough compared to the beautiful, smooth, round, handmade beads, which are created in this way because they're literally rolled on the tongue as the person is making them. They're smoothed with the maker's tongue by hand. So this was a threat to the traditional beads, but eventually, if there is enough of renaissance and enough financial support, then they become viable again because they become more prized, they become fashionable. Just going back to that example of the silver bead maker, I can think of a meeting that I had with someone who was making these beads, and there was a lot of resistance from her husband until he realized that actually she could make more money from making these beads than he was in his job. So he then full-heartedly supported her in this endeavor. So it's really, money talks. And I think that if one sees a renaissance in a heritage sector in Saudi Arabia, which is underpinned by a growth in heritage tourism, then you have a whole infrastructure that then develops around that. You have museum shops, you have high-end costume items that people will be buying that will support this whole industry. So money really is the most important factor.
Dr. Reem.
I think I concur, but I also think this idea of tourism opening the doors for additional requirements so that people can produce, it also can be counterproductive because the intention is not to keep the traditional craft as it is. After all, when you are working with traditional craft, you need time, you need effort, you need more expenses. And it's much easier and alluring to go back and have it pre-produced, for example, in China or somewhere else, in order for it to be available on a mass market level for production, for tourism's sake. So sometimes it might be counterproductive to the idea of preserving it. And again, as you all said, or Shahira also mentioned, having people or experts coming from outside the country into the country, maybe they are not as knowledgeable about the craft itself. So you have a different type of interpretation of the original craft itself, and a hybrid format is being created. And then by that, you are losing that thread there. So it's a very fine line. I think everybody needs to work together. And this is why I thought it was important to initiate something like the ZAY initiative, where we can have an umbrella, where we can all continue to have a dialogue and to work with each other and bring this together so that this knowledge of people like Sid Shahira or Widat Qawar and others are not lost to the times, and they are recorded and they are available for us to make use of and be grounded with it before we continue into that open tourism space and all these numbers of people. I see it now in Expo in Dubai. We have so many nationalities and so many people coming into the Dubai. You wonder whether the products that are being produced are really authentic or not. And this was also a concern in Morocco. If I read correctly, if you research about it, they went through this period. They went through this period in Morocco because it's much easier to produce, to do mass production and use cheaper materials, while proper craft, traditional craft, requires time and requires money. And people tend to walk away from that, sadly.
Yeah.
And Dr. Julian?
That brings me back to the second group of questions and concepts, collecting and documenting, which as a professional museum curator is something I'm involved in quite a bit. And also to prevent the concept that clothing is static. And also, all too often, what I've seen is you have collectors of clothing and collectors of jewelry. But as people have been talking about now, the two belong to each other. And the clothing is used as a backdrop for the gold jewelry, the silver jewelry, as well as the other way around. So how can we create, encourage an adequate level of collecting, documenting, and presenting? Because they're all interrelated. And with the global age that we live in, we have some wonderful opportunities to make this information, these objects, available to the whole world, rather than just one section of the world.
Gillian, can I just say one thing? Because, for example, in our case in Egypt, women would not be interested neither in traditional jewelry nor in traditional costumes. Our traditional jewelry, particularly the Nubian, for example, can be extremely contemporary. It looks realistic and very beautiful, but there's the idea that you want to buy from Bulgari, that you want to buy from Cartier. There's the idea that you're going to wear something that is quote unquote local is absolutely repulsive to people. I'm sorry to say. And I think happens in other Arab countries, not maybe the Gulf, but certainly, as I say, Syria, Iraq, in a way, the very old cultures, Islamic culture, the mainland of Islamic civilization, have westernized. And to go back to for example, to Morocco, you know that the French, I'm not advocating for French colonialism, but the French, when they were occupying the North Africa, did a lot of research on traditional crafts and made a, how do you call it, a stamping, official stamping for quality control of traditional crafts. So this helped them to keep it. While in Egypt, for example, the English not at all. Nobody wanted to look local. Everybody wanted to look like a lord or a lady coming from Buckingham Palace. So this is the problem we're facing. This is why also I'm very grateful about the point that Rima has made about tourism sometimes not being a commercial thing because you want to change. Then you introduce change for the sake of change and not particularly a proper development of a traditional craft that throughout ages changed, but it changed slowly. It absorbed the new trends and modified them and produced a syncretism or syncretic culture between the old and the new. We have lost this. And when we go in an area like Siwa and you see what is being produced to be sold to the tourists, it has nothing to do neither with the colors, nor with the shapes, nor with anything. You'll find hundreds of new material being introduced because every year the designer that come have to sell to the West. And when you sell to the West, you cannot go on selling the same product for several years. You have to change every year.
Yeah, and that is coming back to this point that was made at the beginning, the rapid change, the global world that we inhabit now. This is what we have to deal with. So how, as museum curators, as people who are deeply involved in culture, can we collect, document, and present that will encourage people in the various countries, as well as people looking from outside? Richard, I think with your work in Saudi Arabia, you've been involved in this to a considerable degree. How do you document? What are the language problems? How do you present the information you've collected?
Well, the book which we recently completed on the Mansuja collection is a first attempt really to try and bring together all the different costumes of the kingdom and relate them to their environment. I've not seen another book done like this in Saudi Arabia before. We felt very early on that it wasn't possible to examine the costumes in isolation. It was very important that we related them to the landscape and other traditions in architecture, archaeology, environment from each of the regions, because with Saudi Arabia, you have such a variety of environments, from desert to rugged mountain ranges and cities, Bedouin contexts. So that was very important for us, but it took a very long time. This was a over 10-year project, and it involved a lot of research trips around the kingdom. So the book is one important step. I think when it comes to museums, I think museums are essential. But also, as Dr. Julian said, it's important that these are seen as living objects. They're not just put on mannequins and put in static displays. So with Mansujat, we've always really had two sides to our activities in terms of displaying costumes. We have the old authentic costumes, which are in many cases very fragile and rather difficult to put on people, because they wouldn't stand the constant taking on, taking off, and so on, and different kinds of temperatures and environments. So with the original collection, we really treat them as museum objects, and they will only be displayed on museum quality mannequins and photographed, as we did for the book. But then in addition to that, we also have what we call the walk collection. And these are replicas in many instances, also sometimes original costumes, but ones which have been very heavily repaired or of a slightly lower quality than the originals. And we show these in live costume displays. We've done displays in London at the V&A Museum, but also many across Saudi Arabia itself. And so this gives us an opportunity to show how the items would have actually been worn and combined with things that you can only do on a person, such as the wreaths of flowers that the men wear in Asir. So we feel that's very important to do both of these activities. Just going back to another point that Dr. Gillian mentioned about jewelry, again, looking at the examples in Saudi Arabia, you can't isolate jewelry from the costumes. There are many costumes which incorporate jewelry. For instance, in the south of Saudi Arabia, the Yam tribe are known for their headdresses in which they tie silver rings into the headdress. So the rings aren't worn on the hand, they're used as a sort of embellishment for the headdress. So it's absolutely essential that jewelry and costume are treated as one combined culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fascinated by the project that you've been involved in Saudi Arabia, and it makes me wonder, is it possible to have similar projects in other Arab countries? Is there the financial support from, say, a commercial group or groups to record and document in this manner and present, because presenting is so important? Dr. Reem, what do you think?
The ZAY initiative is very young compared to all your experiences, and I'm humbled to be sitting here on this panel with all of you who have had years and years of work in this field. But this is one of the objectives that we are trying to do through our digital platform. I think we managed through this period to reach so many individuals on many levels through the digital archive that we have been creating. It is very young, it is very small, it needs a lot of work. We have volunteers working with us and so on and so forth, but it is attracting attention, and it's attracting the attention of these institutions and brands and so on and so forth to come in and join and help us in promoting this sort of thing. I think this is one of the key aspects that we are looking for through this symposium and others that might come through, and through the collaboration that we might have together in order to attract various funding entities to come in and help us with this sort of documentation. Producing a digital archive that allows the globe to come in and look at the Arab culture, be it young and be it still small compared to the collections that each one of you has. I think it's one step in the right direction, and I hope we can manage to grow it together as we go along.
Yeah. Well, I know at the Textile Research Centre, we have quite a large collection of Middle Eastern dress, because I've been busy with this field for many years and we get a lot of support. And how feasible, easy, I'm a non-digital person, I like my pen, is it to combine and put together 3, 4, 5 different collections from different institutes and to present it digitally so that the world can use it?
It's a continuous and daily challenge that we are passing through, and sometimes I wonder what I've placed myself into. Really.
I know.
So, I mean, if it wasn't for your mentorship and Shahira's and others like you, Widad, I don't think I would have continued. But it is a continuous struggle. I think we need time to show our capabilities. We need more people to work with us. I think it's very difficult to find researchers who are capable and understand the localized cultures, so that they can speak about them and interpret them in the most accurate possible way. So these are all challenges that we face on a daily basis, and we keep sending material back and forth. The good thing about the technology we have is it's not, it is how can I say, it's continuously changing. It allows us to go in and be able to change. It's not like when you are printing a book and you have printed it, you cannot change it anymore. You have to do a new publication. With the digital archive, we can go in on a daily basis and correct the information, correct the material. We have been trying also, we found that another challenge that we faced is terminology. And I know Shahira wanted to talk about this, but I'll just start a little bit on that. And that is trying to make sense of all these terminologies that we have from Morocco all the way to Iraq and down to Sudan and Yemen. Different terms have different meanings. Sometimes they are shared, sometimes they are completely different. We had to start creating a digital dictionary, and we are starting to plug in the information. And this is on its own is another challenge that we are facing. We're looking also for funding in order to help us continue this. And we are trying to affiliate ourselves with various institutions such as yours and other universities and entities around the world in order to be able to benefit from their knowledge and from the students and master's, PhD students who can come in and help us and work with us. So it's a really, really hard challenge and a daily one that we face.
Yeah, I know from my own personal view, I have enough problems with describing textiles with, is it the American English? Is it English? Yes. Then you get the French influence, you get the German. I have the Dutch as well. Yeah. Let alone adding the Arabic elements in, and everybody has their own terminology.
Very true. The word itself, the thobe, for example, which is the simplest of terms, thobe in itself means fabric, but then it could mean a certain dress style in Iraq or Egypt or Palestine or the Saudi Arabia or Morocco even, and Algeria and all the other countries. And it can be pronounced differently. It can be thobe, thobe, and so on and so forth. How do we capture all of this? How do we put it together? Again, it's a daily challenge. I know, Shahira, you wanted to add something to this.
No, I just wanted, it is not related to the subject of terminology, but it was related to what Gillian said at one time, is about people recording and gather and collecting. Well, in some countries, like, for example, Palestine, as well as Egypt, in the case of Widad started collecting a long time ago, and therefore she could have a very good collection. I doubt that anybody now could find the equivalent of what she has collected.
Absolutely.
And this is about me. I mean, I have been collecting for the past 65 years or something of the sort. But any young person now will not find, and they will not even find it in museums, because unfortunately in countries like Egypt, Syria, or Iraq, who have a very long history, people were much more interested in Pharaonic, Byzantine, Coptic, early Islamic, or even later Islamic Mamluk or whatever. Then the folkloric tradition was in a way rejected as being regional. While, for example, in my case, throughout the research that I did for my book, I found out that they were not regional dresses. They were national costumes. They existed everywhere in Egypt, but then one area has abandoned some of the characteristic and has introduced or being influenced by other outside influences. And therefore, after some time, the costume has developed into 12 or 13 different costumes, but they all start with one costume. But what I want to say is that whether neither in the case of Widad or in my case, was the state interested or even the white public interested? So this has relied on personal initiative, and I don't think that this will be changing because the dresses have disappeared in both cases.
It's a problem that's found throughout the world, also in Europe, Central Asia, everywhere. Clothing, textiles are not regarded as important, and yet there are very few naked people wandering around. It's a crazy situation.
To add a little thing about that is that, for example, in Egypt for Siwa, Ahmed Fakhri, who is the person who dealt with the history of Siwa because he's an Egyptologist, said that we knew that it had become Christian at one time and that both pharaonic and Christian religion were practiced, but there's no material proof. Well, I found the material proof in the dresses of Siwa that are embroidered with crosses, and therefore dresses can also, like architecture, provide material proof of historical facts.
Absolutely, and
learning. Right? Sorry, Dr. Gillian, but Shahira, you are writing a book now. You're publishing one on this matter.
Yes, it will appear. The IFAO is publishing it. It's called Egypt's Lost Legacies, and the Egypt's Lost Legacies, the costumes of the women in the countryside, oasis and desert. And I finished the first volume, which is the dresses of the Nile Valley and its oases. And I'm now working on the nomadic and semi-nomadic people of Egypt. It's going to be the second volume. Then the third volume is going to be hair accessories, hairdos, hair accessories, and costume costume accessories and head covers. And the fourth volume will be the jewelry.
Yeah, amazing. And that comes actually to another point that was made earlier on. Richard, have we left it too late?
I think coming at this originally from a UK perspective, I think that when one looks at heritage, using Britain as an example, you see that it was really only after the tremendous destruction that took place in Europe and in Britain after the Second World War, in which we lost so much of the historical architecture in this country, in London and other cities. And then the destruction that then took place, which one could argue was even greater, in the rush to modernity during the 50s and 60s, in which key buildings, historical buildings, were threatened with demolition. It was only when this situation became very severe that you had the establishment of organizations like English Heritage and the National Trust and the Victorian Society, which saved some important buildings, like, for instance, St Pancras Station, just around the corner from where I'm sitting now, was threatened with demolition. And so I think that sometimes one has to go through a stage, a period where traditions and heritage become very unfashionable, and they're deemed to be something that the younger generation is no longer interested in the rush towards modernity and technology. But if you ride it out, if you can ride it out until the fashions change again, you suddenly find everyone actually wants the traditional things. They reevaluate the importance of these things to themselves and to their national identity. And I think that's, to some extent, what's happening now. I think that, thankfully, in many cases, we haven't left it too late simply because of the determined nature. For instance, just from my own experience, the women that I work with in Mansujaat, who held on and were passionate about these traditional costumes before it became fashionable. And they did their collecting at a time when a lot of these items could be found in junk stores, basically. So I don't think we've left it too late. Obviously, a lot has been lost, just as we've lost a lot of heritage and culture elsewhere. But I think that thanks to the determined nature of some groups and individuals, there's enough there for us to to see a renaissance.
And it's thanks to people like Shahira and Widad that this can be possible, because
Absolutely.
of the effort that they have put in over decades of time. We need you. Thank you for what you've done.
You're right, Gillian. I did a lot of defilés over the past 50 years to show the traditional costume to the women of Egypt and sometimes also abroad. And in Egypt, everybody was full of admiration for during the show, and came after the show to say, you made us proud of Egypt. But then half an hour later, they forgot everything about it. I don't think I had any impact whatsoever.
You have definitely, both of you have had an impact, and
yes,
this is for the future.
Yes.
Without you, it wouldn't be possible.
I've rejoined you. We have an awful lot of questions and observations that have come in. The irony that you seem to be pointing out, and that some of the questions that are also alluding to, is that sometimes it's attention from tourism or people from outside to the wonders of local costume that suddenly initiate interest in a country in itself. In particular, there is a couple of comments here, Shahir, about people in Egypt, and a couple of people have observed that they had always seen that it was tourists traveling throughout Egypt that were interested in the regional costume, and they're both buying and showing interest has created local interest. But also there is an issue that some visitors or Westerners don't feel as though it's appropriate to be wearing the costume.
I have to tell you that in my case, I have an outlet for producing traditional costume, and I have 4 Egyptian women that are my clients, and 2 who are married, Westerners married to Egyptian. All of my clients were coming from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Bahrain, Lebanon, but Egyptians would not, most of them would not be seen wearing anything Egyptian for anything in the world. And some of my foreign friends who came and took either coats or dresses from us, and were sometimes asked, because they were diplomats in a diplomatic circle, by Egyptian women diplomat, it's very pretty what you're wearing. And she'd say, yes, you know, it's made in Egypt. And they look at her and they say, why do you buy in Egypt? I mean, you're the wife of an ambassador. You have money. I mean, this is what is implied.
Yes.
Why do you buy in Egypt? So I think that the point you're doing is true. Though usually when I have expats that come to my craft shop, I say, be careful, because sometimes you have a tendency to buy a dress when you live in a country. When you go back into your home, you don't wear it. But whatever happened, these dresses that were bought by people, either from traditional craft shops in the early 20th century or from me, have found their way into the museums. And often I go to the Musée de Gay Branly to find one of the oldest stelae, or I have a look at the Metropolitan or the Ashmolean Museum with the fragments of textile. So the fact that tourists have acquired these dresses have allowed them very often to survive, for researchers like me or with that, to be able to document them and show that these patterns existed already 300 years ago or whatever.
I mean, there's a question here as well that someone asked whether there is a country or a culture that would act as an ideal template. Is there somewhere that has managed to resuscitate interest in local textile culture, national textile culture, that could be a model?
I think India. Because I think in India, the daughter of a Maharaja, because I knew some of them, when she gets married, they do her 6,000 saris. At the same time as she's also buying Christian Dior and I don't know, Escada and whatever. But for this reason, the Indian craft, I think, have continued on adding to their repertoire. And this is why also when designers want to do beautiful work, at one time they used to go to India because they found a living tradition with a lot of innovation and people that could produce for them something that could not be found anywhere else.
There's also a question here, Richard, that relates to the production of beads in Saudi Arabia, and someone has said that there's a belief embedded in crafts with craftswomen in Saudi Arabia, that they believe that making beads is bad for their health because of the lead content in the beads. This is I don't know whether it's well founded or whether it's
yes, this is true. That the traditional beads were a kind of silver alloy, so it did include lead. And yes, this is certainly something that I've been made aware of. I don't know if it's possible to produce them in the same way without any lead involved at all. I don't know, but it's certainly something that I have heard about.
And
lead existed in many of the traditional crafts. For example, hand-blown glass also includes a lot of lead vapor that can be harmful. So the idea is that when you have such a craft, you should be monitoring the health of the people, giving them proper food, having them drink a lot of milk. I mean, there's attempts. And I have to tell you one thing, that analysis of mummies in Egypt have proved that the Egyptian people had lead poisoning, most of them, because we were eating in earthenware pots that were glazed with lead glazes. So contrary to what is believed, 5,000 years ago, we had a problem also with lead because of the lead glazes.
Yeah. I also think that there's a need for balance here, because although we could say, yes, there are certain health implications attached to some of these traditional lifestyles or crafts. I mean, look at us with our lead car, pollution, and there are also a lot of health issues with modern contemporary life as well. So I think it's unfair to sort of
blame one element.
Exactly.
I think there's a question that might be specifically directed to Dr. Ream, which is, do you have plans for an exhibition of traditional costumes and lectures at the V&A in London, perhaps?
Well, we look forward to this. We are in contact with them. It requires time, and I think we are not mature enough yet. We need work. We need a lot of work before we can reach to a level where we can produce an exhibit for the V&A. But it's something in our mind, and we spoke to them about it. And ideally, in a dream world, I would like to showcase the work that's been done by Gillian, by Shahira, by Widad, and others who came before me, and maybe do a collaborative work that can show their efforts, their life's work. I am still at the beginning of the road. I have a long way to go, but I think these women are formidable, and they have done a marvelous job in each one of them in their field, and this is why this I think can exist only with their effort and collaboration. So yes, I would love to. If we have the right funds, why not? The sky is the limit.
I think it seems from listening to your talks and observations in the panel that one of the issues is that costume, dress, obviously conveys meaning to people. Both the meaning that I'm conveying myself, the message I'm trying to give out to people who are seeing me, but also other people that interpret your dress in different ways. And this seems to be one of the crux of the problems in people not wanting to wear local costumes or dress in countries, because it may seem as though there's a political point being made, or that there's questions about identity, or you do not look as though you're perhaps westernized enough. Is there something that can be done to counter this? Is that just about exposure for younger people?
The concept of dress and identity has been studied in depth, and increasingly in depth, thank heavens. And basically, it's a silent language that everybody in the world speaks, the problems of the number of dialects and trying to understand the dialects. And if you get a dialect wrong, you can have severe repercussions, such as if you wear a black chador in Iran, which is inside out, it's sending a very almost, I'm a prostitute looking for work message. So you have to be so careful, and learning dialects, learning culture is essential, and it takes time. And making people very appreciative and understanding and looking forward to wearing their regional dress is important, rather than condemning it as something folkloristic, old-fashioned. I wouldn't be seen dead in it. It's the lack of pride in many cases. And that's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of messages. It's a lot of publications, a lot of museum exhibitions, and going around schools, as Richard was saying, with a living collection, a walking collection, because so often garments are put flat on a wall and you don't understand they're 3D objects meant to be seen in motion. And it makes such a difference.
And I think as well, the nature, I mean, one of the areas that I work in with carpets and textiles is that when they're on display in a museum, they become, especially for younger or the people that are uninitiated, that they puts a distance between the person and the object immediately, and it feels as though one has to have reverence for it rather than understand this as an object that needs to be worn and touched and used, because which is always a problem, I think, to shorten that gap between the person and the object, if it may be old or even if it's new, that you can actually touch it and wear it.
Yeah, and that's why the Textile Research Centre is not a museum. We have deliberately said we're not a museum. We're a knowledge centre where people can come, and if they're serious, they can handle, look at, feel, smell, photograph on the inside. Let these objects, these textiles, tell a story or many stories, and not put them behind glass and kill them off.
I think it's very important that people feel that their culture belongs to them. And I think this is one of the problems with museums. If costumes are presented to people, it almost becomes an imposition from outside. I think it's important that although museums obviously have a very important role in terms of preservation, I think that it's also incredibly important to make these costumes accessible, to make the people feel that they are involved, and to give them that sense of pride in this being their cultural identity.
And I say something about cultural identity. I don't think that the problem is only costume. It's very much felt for costume. But in a case like Egypt, which is a country that has a beautiful history of urbanism, of architecture, of household furniture, everything has been liquidated. So that the urbanism of our city is following, starting the 19th century, the Osman theories. Now we are going to become a bit of our new capital is going to be Dubai. And so what I want to say is that it is not only costume, it is urbanism, it is architecture, it is house decoration, and it is all the aspects of our material culture that have been exchanged for one that does not belong to us.
I have a question particularly for you, directed to you, Shahira, from someone saying, I'm a designer from Egypt. I'm looking to find out more about Egyptian traditional dress. What advice can you give? I think that you probably give her the title of your book.
Yes, and also to come and that all of the dresses that I've collected, because I'm open to all young people who want to know more. But the only thing I mind is a bit what happens. Some case I don't say about this young person, but the cut and paste approach, which is to go to a minaret and take a star pattern and put it on a dress and say I'm doing a dress with an identity. So this is what I don't want to encourage. But anybody who wants to come and study the dresses, and see how you can transpose from the past to create a fashion that is related to our past as well as adapted to our future. I would love to meet them and help them as much as I can. So they can have, I can give you my number, which is 0100 12 60052, but send me a WhatsApp reel, a message to give me your number, because I don't answer unknown numbers because of real estate cockroach fighting.
Would it be, so I could, I will put your WhatsApp, your number in the response for this person.
Yeah, please, let me just add to this. Put down the message that you want so that Shahira will understand that you are trying to get information regarding that topic, and then she will respond. Otherwise, she's going to get bombarded with all kinds of calls. And we were just joking about that, by the way, just in case why you see us all laughing, because that was the topic we were discussing just before we started the session. But I wanted to add a one small point, and that is what we're trying to do at the ZEI, and we've taken a step in a different format, and that is we depend on people donating pieces to us, costumes to us, to add to our collection. And we don't want a large number, but we want a number that can represent the Arab world so that we can be able to best introduce that culture. So the idea is not the large amount of pieces, but key pieces that can give us information about the culture. And what we've done is to encourage people, as you just said, Ben, is to ask people that donate to us to give us the story of that piece. So they speak about their mothers, their fathers, their uncles, their grandparents, and we are putting this information together with the clothing that we are receiving so that we have the story and the narrative of those who wore these pieces, those who experienced it, how they felt about it, where did they wear it. And when you give it a narrative, it touches people and it speaks to them on a different level. And it becomes very close to them. You start recognizing who they are. They become very proud that my grandmother is mentioned on that site, and you can go and look at her dress and what she wore. Sometimes if we have the image of that person wearing the costume, we even put that as well in order to give it this, what Dr. Gillian was just mentioning, giving it that human feeling that these are pieces that were worn by people and they were proud by wearing them. So we're trying to sort of bridge this through that format. Another thing we have tried is that we are working with designers in the area in Dubai here, young designers in universities and so on and so forth. We have now a competition on UAE dress because it's the 50th anniversary of the UAE. And we have managed to select 5 finalists. From them, we're selecting 1. They have been working on producing new pieces of traditional costume. And Shahira, I was so surprised that one of them went to the depth of dyeing her fabric in natural dyes. She went to women, you know, in the area, and she used pomegranates, she used kurkum, she used kamoon, all these natural dyes that were traditional from the area in order to produce her piece, which shows you that these young women are really going there and understanding what we're talking about, what you just mentioned. They are not copy pasting or cutting and pasting, but they are really thinking about it and trying to develop it, which makes you feel very happy that, yes, once you allow the young generation the opportunity, and once you open that window, they are going to make use of it, which is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so panel 1, you're eating into panel 2's time. So if you would like to elegantly move to stage right, we will then move in on stage left with panel 2, please. Thank you very much, and we will see you at the end.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much. And we are now going to move on to our second session of the symposium today, the role and relevance of heritage for contemporary brands. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for this session, Shirin El-Khatib, the Chief Executive Officer of Majid Al Futtaim Shopping Malls. Shirin spearheads customer-centered retail concepts, and has an impressive track record on building strong management teams, establishing strong alliances with global brands, and curating exceptional customer experiences. Under her direction, Mall of Emirates, with whom the ZE Initiative has a partnership, has built unique retail experiences based on its heritage. And is recognized as the leader in retail innovation. Shirin's remarkable record has led Time magazine to name her as one of the key women revolutionizing global luxury. I hope you heard that because it sounds very scrambled on my end.
Me too. Maybe you should repeat.
Okay, well, in that case, it might be best there for me just to hand over to Shirin rather than repeat that.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Ben. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the ZE Initiative first virtual Arab costume collections, Sustaining Legacies Symposium. I'm Shireen Al-Khatib, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Majd Al Futtaim Shopping Malls. It's an honor hosting this panel to discuss the role and relevance of heritage for contemporary brands. At Majd Al Futtaim, we pride ourselves in celebrating the deep history and culture of the region. So when the ZE Initiative approached me to be part of this talk in the Jubilee year of the UAE, I very gladly accepted. And today we will be inviting three incredible industry experts to debate, discuss, and share their thoughts on the relevance of heritage for contemporary brands. We will be exploring whether or not heritage plays a role in the fashion marketplace today, how we can make heritage relevant on the catwalk and the high street, cultural misappropriation in the fashion industry, Arab heritage in the wider fashion world outside modest fashion, and how brands can work with heritage organizations like the ZE to make heritage relevant in modern fashion. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker of the evening, Emily Metch, who is the International Brand General Manager of Christophe Chalhoub Group, the leading partner for luxury across the Middle East. And our next speaker is Mariam Mosalli, the leading voice for Saudi Arabia in the luxury consultancy field. After starting her career as a journalist, she is now an established name in the fashion industry, with her company standing as the major consultancy firm specializing in luxury marketing in the GCC. Her entrepreneurial company has been praised as a key player in elevating the global status of the Saudi Arabian fashion industry. Welcome, Mariam, founder of Niche Arabia. Now, I'd like to introduce our third and final speaker of the evening, who has been involved in art and culture for more than 30 years. Having worked at Abu Dhabi's Cultural Foundation and holding a PhD in Islamic art and archaeology, our next speaker has gone on to launch the ZE Initiative, the region's first fashion history archive, a digital museum that exhibits more than 700 articles of traditional clothing from this region. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Rima Mutwalli, founder of the ZE Initiative. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and let's begin the session. And my first question sorry, can you hear me well?
Now, yes.
Yeah, sorry. So my first question is about playing a role in the fashion marketplace today. So do you feel heritage plays a role?
Sorry, I couldn't hear it. I cut a little bit. Was that to me?
I can't hear you.
Sound is
yeah, it's cutting for some reason. I have full.
So, Mariam,
can you guys hear me okay?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Question repeated?
Yes, I'll ask you the question.
Sorry,
again.
yes, could you repeat that?
The question says, does heritage play a role in the fashion marketplace today?
Definitely, and I think more so than ever, what we're seeing with Saudi Arabia, especially since we have such a young population, 70% under the age of 30, 50% of one, is that we have this very young Gen Z generation that is really eager to retain their heritage, even if it's something new to them. So one of the things that we've noticed is that it's kind of like Japan back in the 90s, where you have this youth going back to, are you guys not hearing me?
No, the sound went completely. I couldn't hear anything. I don't know about the rest. Sorry,
Same
Mariam.
for me. Same for me. I couldn't hear a thing. It's garbled.
She's now. Shall we go to our next guest until Mariam comes back? I think
No,
the
it's
sound.
not Mariam, Dr. Reem. I don't think it's Mariam. I think it's. Shall I try? Shall I try and see if the sound works? So
I'm being told that it might be from Mariam's connection that we are experiencing issues. But
okay.
Let's go ahead with our other guest, and then maybe we can come back to Mariam.
Yes. So maybe Emily, you can tell us if you think heritage plays a role in the fashion marketplace today.
Yes, with a great pleasure. Thank you very much for having me here. Yes, of course, heritage is really important into fashion and into lifestyle in any ways. Why? Is because we need to give sense much more than ever now in everything that we do. Much more than ever now in everything that we do. I don't know if you hear me well, but it's still crumbling from here.
No, we don't hear you well.
Okay. Is this any better now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I was saying that, of course, heritage is really important in every marketplace today, especially for fashion, but also art de vivre. It's really important to give sense in that time because of what we just faced is the last years with COVID, of course, but also with entire politics and economics problem. People are really looking to have sense in everything they are doing. And fashion represents what the image we want to give to people. And it's the same also for your house and the way you will receive people to your place. So more than ever, of course, the way you will build your entire world have to give sense. And heritage is, of course, a piece of it because it shows everything around your taste, but also around your culture. And it's really important, particularly in Shalhoub Group and in Christoffel also, that we try to give sense to the brand that we are owning. And for example, for Christoffel, it's something that since more than 200 years, we try to explain what is the way to receive art de vivre à la française is really, really important. And I think that every country now face this need of sense in the way they want to show their habits. So of course, it's a real legacy for every luxury house all over the world, and especially, let's say, I think in the countries that have a long history, of course, the Gulf countries, but also the French and all the Europe countries really wants to show and empower their history around I mean, all the habits and coutume and let's say taste around their history. So for sure, to answer your question, heritage is for me, and I think now for everybody, a real role to take into consideration into fashion marketplace and into savoir vivre and savoir recevoir means to have people to your place and to receive people or to show who you are needs sense more than ever.
Thank you. Your thoughts, Mariam? Let's try and see if it's working or not.
Yeah, okay, inshallah this works. Yeah, sorry. So I was just saying that, you know, with Saudi Arabia in specific, our population is quite young. So we have a population, you know, 70% under the age of 30, 50 under the age of 21. So it's a very young Gen Z kind of population. And it's interesting because they seem to be the ones that really want to protect their heritage. And if they want to stand out amongst them, especially now that the spotlight is on them. And I think one of the ways to do that is to, you know, showcase their heritage. You know, announced that, okay, modest wear is it's cutting.
Okay. Sorry.
It's me. I'm going to try to come in and go again. Just start guys without me. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Dr. Reem, how do you feel about the fact that heritage is the past, fashion is about the future, and how we can make heritage relevant on the catwalk and the high streets? Any thoughts about that? You're muted, Dr. Reem.
So sorry about that. I hope that we will get Mariam back to get her opinion. But I think if you had followed our earlier panel discussion, I think it is imperative to have brands and fashion to work hand in hand with people and experts from the academic and institutional backgrounds, crafters, individuals, creative artists, artisans. It is very important that we have these two worlds work hand in hand together in order to achieve a sustainable legacy that can continue to the future. If I didn't believe this, I wouldn't have existed as a ZEI initiative. This is the whole realm that we are living through, and this is our objective: is to make sure that we bridge this gap that is between commerce, brands, and the industrial world, and the academic and heritage and historical world. I believe very much so in that. And I think we three of us share this situation.
Thank you. Emily, since you represent Christophe in the region, would you, for example, explore the possibility of Christophe launching an arabesque line or a line that is based on certain architectural designs or Islamic designs from the region, etc.? Do you think it's something that's doable, and would you be willing to do?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, of course. It's true that Christophe is a very French brand since 200 years, but it's owned by Groupe Chaloup since more than 20 years. And we are very, very proud to be owned by such an amazing and generous group that the Chaloup Group is representing. We just did at the Expo at Dubai, I think you heard, an amazing exposition around Art de la Table with Baccarat and also with Bernardo and with Christophe. It was such an amazing pleasure to be in Dubai and to show how much these French brands are expressing the best way, the art de vivre in a Dubai way for that exposition. It means that art de vivre and art de recevoir, I mean, the pleasure to share and the pleasure to receive to your place with art de vivre is something worldwide. It's not something French, it's not something, it's something that all families do in a different way, but it's really cultural in every, let's say, countries, a bit different. It's of course, but at the end, we have one link that makes us all together, is the fact that we live for having friends and for having families around dinner with different culture. And what's amazing is the way that at the end, what links us everywhere is the way to share something. Different food, different culture, different religion maybe, but at the end, the same pleasure to be all together. And it was an amazing way to express that in Dubai. And to answer your questions, of course, Christophe is very aware of that culture since many years. And 150 years ago, we did also a bed for a very, very famous king in India. We did a lots of plates and service for Arabic families and from prince and from sheikhs and some Lebanese or very, very old families. So yes, of course, Christophe since more than 200 years is really working very hard to find different way to represent the culture into habits of everyday with simple objects of the everyday basis, like plates, like I don't know. I mean, there is so many ideas, but of course, it's really important for you to know that Christophe is not only fork and knife from French culture, but many products are used, particularly for Ramadan. We did a lot of pieces for Ramadan. And yeah, why? Because I think that a lot of Arabic family love Christophe since ever, and we are very pleased and very honored to continue to follow the path in giving as much as we can of specializations, engraving, or specials habits for all over the world. And especially because we are owned by the Chaloub family, yes, we are really into that and really into making details for every culture.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mariam, I hope it works now.
I switched to my phone, so hopefully this is it. So, I've been called a disruptor before, but this was a bit much.
Yeah. A question for you is,
tell me,
since heritage is about craft techniques and materials, do you see a role for traditional artisan craft in modern fashion?
I definitely see that. And I think, especially when you're talking about luxury, but I think that also the way that fashion is moving is we're looking at different ways to create things, and different, words have been thrown out like sustainability and stuff like that. And I think that we also need to look at how that's evolving. I think, you could do something, like a Sadu fabric print, but then do it in a new modern way. And I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of the Saudi contemporary designers really focus on. Let's do the traditional look of the Saudi jewelry, but let's do it with a 3D printer, for example. And I think that kind of challenge of innovation and heritage is what's really going to be exciting, especially from Saudi Arabia, which is really focusing on this manufacturing side of fashion.
Thank you. And will a better understanding of heritage prevent cultural misappropriation in the fashion industry, you think?
I talk about this a lot because I think, when I was a little girl and I saw Shauki fabric or Sadu fabric on the runways, I would get excited. I never was like, oh my God, they're not, crediting us in the right way. And I think, anyone that's looking at fashion from far away sees that. But then when you go really deeper into the matter and you start seeing about how these things can basically take away from these artisans that need this for their livelihood, then you start kind of questioning, how can brands still be inspired by my culture without being canceled? And I think, a lot of young designers, that's kind of like their biggest fear now, is this idea of being canceled on social media, because it's happening, around every corner. And I think for us, one of the things that, is a great opportunity for things like the Zay Initiative, for Mansoujat and these different institutions, is to really to be a connector. I mean, I established Saudi Style Council, and one of our main kind of, premises of this whole thing is that we want to be an available resource for anybody. We want them to reach out to us and ask us those questions. We want to tell them, okay, yes, use our, our cultural site of Al-Ula, but, let's also be respectful to the culture and make sure she's not wearing a mini skirt, in this very conservative area. If you want to have that city girl, we still want to, I think, appreciate our modesty here. It's something we're very proud of. Our king is known as the custodian of the two holy mosques. It's something that we hold with great pride. And I think that, people often confuse us opening up with us becoming more westernized. And I think that that's not necessarily something that a lot of Saudis feel is correct. For us, we feel that you could still be, very local and still be modern. I'm an example of a modern Saudi woman. And for me, that doesn't mean I'm wearing crop tops and mini skirts just because that's what the West is doing. So I think that's sometimes lost in translation. What we're seeing is this very young generation really pushing back and saying, hey, we are contemporary women, and this is how we dress. And it's very, it's very heavy in tradition, and that's okay.
Thank you. Dr. Reem.
Yes, I would add to this the fact that when you have young designers, as Mariam just mentioned, and you have the whole world coming to this area of the world, trying to work with them, brands and so on and so forth, it is imperative to have the right grounding tools. And it is important that we would have the platforms such as the Zay or the other books that are produced by the panel that came just before you, in order to enlighten people, to give them the references, because it's very important to have the right references. As Mariam just pointed out, it's not only a matter of a mini skirt or whether you're having a shoot in an appropriate or not appropriate situation. But also it is understanding the techniques, understanding the craft, understanding the history of what came before. Whether it is you are a national of that country or whether you are an expatriate coming into the country. What happens many times nowadays is the fact that they barely skim the surface, but the gist of the matter, the juice of the matter, people don't spend the time to study and understand. And knowledge, in my opinion, is the key to all of this. So it's very important to work hand in hand, as Mariam was stating earlier, with institutions such as ours and the others that you've just met in the earlier panel, in order to ensure these nuances are dealt with.
Exactly. Yeah, these things are not, readily available on Google. And I think, my biggest advice to any designer that wants to be inspired by this region, because it is a beautiful region, and I definitely want to encourage that, is to just reach out. I mean, now we have so many of these, fashion influencers and stylists and like you said, institutions that you can just, have these conversations with, because that's the way you're going to understand the culture the best, I think. And, again, I think that a lot of times brands now are kind of terrified of, broaching that point because, oh, what if we do the teacup and it's wrong or whatever? I'm sure you guys have had, different consultants come on board and kind of guide you guys. And I think, that's the correct way, because you want to show that respect. I mean, that's why you're creating that product or that item or that garment, is because you're inspired and want to show respect again to that region.
If I may add something, I really appreciate what just Marianne said, and I really fully agree with her in the fact that I think everything about non-understanding is most of the time a lack of knowledge. And if we just have time to know each other much better, and it's a question of respecting each other much more, and I fully agree, Mariam, I'm fully aligned with you. I think Christopher, in a way, is a great example, because it's not that we are not doing what we are doing since the beginning. It's just we are opening our eyes on other countries, and I think fashion is the same. And the brands that are actually able to do that, and there is of course Chanel, for example, or Vuitton, whatever, all the ones that are succeeded now really much, it's because they open their mind on the other markets and they are able to respect other culture and way to dress for the women especially. And in the era that we are facing right now, with women having, let's say, much more voices, and it's an example that we are doing today, and I thank you for that, and I'm really proud to be with Marianne online for that. I think what's important is a lack of knowledge, and it's our role in being powerful women to spread the idea of we can all be different and respecting each other with different culture. It's just a question of respecting heritage of each country and each religion and each way to dress or whatever, because at the end it's the same subject. We are just, I think it's really important that we say that knowledge, culture, and open-minded is of course the key to address different ways for a brand, and it's a must-have in this era. It's in these days.
Yes.
I totally agree. And I think, that's one of the beauties of these things, is that it's not about discouraging people. It's really about encouraging them. It's one of the reasons why, we were discussing earlier about cultural misappropriation, is that it really kind of hinders that creativity for a lot of brands, because they're very scared to broach that topic. And I think, that's the opposite of what we want to do. And so just being open and having that collaborative, mindset is really key and important. And I think women do it better than men.
I'm sure.
Indeed. So having said what you said, and Arab heritage is by definition modest, do you think there's a place for Arab heritage in the wider fashion world outside modest fashion? Dr. Reem.
Outside.
Go ahead, Mariam. I want to listen to what you're saying. Everybody listens to me all the time. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, no, I definitely think so. And I think we've seen it before when we've seen these subtle inclusions of our heritage on the runway. I've seen a bisht done in Roberto Cavalli on the runway. We've seen Stéphane Roland work on, doing these amazing abaya silhouettes, but, the model underneath looks like someone from Schiaparelli. It's kind of this beautiful mix of East meets West. And so I definitely think that. And I think that if you look at the modern, Saudi girl that travels, she's doing that herself. She's wearing wearing her, her ripped jeans and her, her t-shirt, and then over it is this, colorful abaya that she's wearing to Coachella. So I think that, there's definitely a place for it. I don't think that modest is something that's innate with our fashion. It's something that's innate with our fashion here. And I think that, that context is very important, that geo context of where we're dressing. Like I wouldn't go to the Vatican and wear something short. I would respect that location. And I think that can be the same can be said here. But taking that fashion outside, I mean, now we're seeing contemporary brands, especially in Saudi Arabia with street style, where they're incorporating a lot of the heritage motifs of, let's say, prints and, al-qatta print from Asir, that kind of stuff. But then it's done in a hoodie. So I definitely think that, they're not, they don't have to be put together.
I think also the input of young designers of the region. And you are getting now, we have wonderful designers, whether it is from Lebanon, from Iraq, from Egypt, from Morocco, North Africa, even as well as the Gulf regions, which we just spoke about. I think their input is very important, and their contribution to this field is very important, because they are trying to sort of find the way they could express themselves using the tools that are available now. Now the whole world is open to us. Possibilities are endless, and to be grounded with education, there are many universities opening that teach the craft itself, teach fashion, teach style. These are important tools that are being made available for the individuals from this region, and I think that will help contribute, give a voice to people from the region.
I agree. Go ahead, Mariam.
That's how I was going to say, I agree with that. And I think, that's something that I've really kind of discovered myself, especially with COVID and kind of being stuck in Saudi for the past 2 years, is that we saw a lot of us young Saudis discovering our country for the first time and really excited to discover that. And I think that, these things weren't readily available before. We'd have to go specifically and look for it, whether it was going to Art of Heritage or Mansujat and trying to find these resources. Whereas now, like you just said, the world is open through social media, through the internet, where, these resources are more readily, I would say, available. We can, push it a little bit further. And inshallah, with talks like this and raising awareness, we'll get more interest. But I think that that's definitely something that I'm seeing from the youth in specific, and being driven from the youth, is that they want to know their stories. And like Dr. Reem, what you said, it's beautiful to know the story. What is the meaning behind this way of doing it? And that's where you get that sentimentality. That's where you get that history. And I think that's something that this youth definitely doesn't want to lose. They don't want to lose grasp of that.
Definitely. And one of the major examples is we have something that's called mjazza or miyazza in the Arab world. You have it in all the different kinds of cultures that are around the Arab world. And it's basically using leftover reminiscences of fabrics in paneling format and creating a dress out of it. Now, this is a recycling process that was innate with our, grandparents and grandmothers, and they used it without the term recycling. And we have now the whole world talking about recycling and its effect on the environment. So we were doing it innately without thinking, and our ancestors were doing it. And you find examples, clear examples in these clothes that you have that come from the past. So it is wonderful to see that this is in our culture, it is embedded, but we don't see it, we're rediscovering it again.
If I may add, Dr. Reem, first of all, of course, I agree with you, but I think it's over fashion, but it's over the word. I mean, the link maybe will be the craftsmanship, and the craftsmanship and let's say the know-how of every culture or a brand is in it. And when you speak about an amazing fabric that you will reuse because you have it from a mother, for a grandmother, and it's the same for a brand like Christopher or many luxury brands, because what is luxury today? The luxury is the heritage that you have from your culture, as we said before. And I fully agree with you on the fact that recycling and everything are new words, but really in most of the culture, it's already done this way. And when you have from heritage from your mother, your grandmother, some knife and fork from Christopher, or an amazing fabric from a dress that you can reuse in a kaftan or in a coat or whatever, it means the same. It means that I think that the sense that you give to product today is so important, because after everything, what do we have at the end with this difficult period that we have is really the DNA of the sense that your family, your friends, your culture is going to give you. And the most important is the way we are going to be able to give that to our children's and our great children's. And we have to not forget that we, with no ego, we are just someone in the past time, but all the fabrics and the know-how will stay forever. And this is our role, I think, to keep the culture alive. And fashion is that for here. And we can speak about fashion like 1,000 years ago, and it's still a subject, and it's the same for the culture of art de vivre or art de recevoir. And what you said is really important. It's not about really recycling and everything. It's also a way to give the fire to the next generation and the truth of the real know-how.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I would like to pose this question to the three of you, and it is about finding or suggesting or talking about practical ways in which brands can work with heritage organizations like the ZEI to make heritage relevant in modern fashion. So what are your thoughts about that?
Mariam, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I think that, thank you. No, I think that, you know, the way that brands can approach these organizations is, you know, again, just reaching out to them, asking them about also the state of mind. I think that, you know, we are very trend focused as a region. You know, we tend to kind of, Sadu comes out, as you can see, and then it's everywhere. Then you have the Shauki fabric that comes and it's everywhere. So, I mean, really working with people that are on the ground, I think is very important. And as well as people that are from those regions. I think, you know, we get a lot of experts that are international, and that's great. And I think their input is amazing. But I think to get those cultural nuances that we spoke about earlier, it's really important to have people that are kind of living that. Like, for example, you know, we could create those beautiful coffee cups, but are those actually being used now, you know, in a formal setting still, or have they been replaced with something else? I mean, I'm just throwing that as an example. We're definitely still using the coffee cups, but just kind of having those type of conversations, I think, are really key. And then, you know, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that, for example, I have some brands that want to be inspired by the region, but let's say they don't have access, especially with COVID, you know, to actually utilize the artisans here. So one of the suggestions that I often have is, why don't we do something where we give back? So instead of, you know, using that artisan, we're manufacturing it in Italy, but at the same time, for every sale, we give back a percentage to those artisans in order to help them with their livelihood. And so there are different ways we can do it. I don't think there's any excuse not to have those connections.
I second that. And our concern is research, and this is an area that also can be helped. Brands can help us with, and by forging synergies and connections with you know, trade institutions and brands and so on and so forth. We hope that we would be able to cover the expenses to empower researchers, because you need people to sit and do the hard work. We need people to go back and look into the history and study it. It is very important to have this information, the accurate information. And to do so, you need to empower people to do it. So you need to empower crafters, you need to empower researchers, you need to empower creativity. These all require funding, and brands are very much capable to work with these various entities to help create a healthy environment where this and a proper ecosystem where all of this, you call it circular, is it circular? Is that the right term? Economy can take place. Exactly. I'm learning all these new terminologies from your young generation. It's really
Emily, what are your thoughts?
I fully agree with both of them. It's like I know them forever, and so it's great. I fully agree. Of course, economy circular is really important. I think all those words around vintage and everything are really modern way to express things. But at the end, we are. I mean, it's the same. When I receive from my mother an old coat or an old dress or an old fork and knife from Christophe or whatever, I think it's the exact same story. It's all about culture. And it's different in every country. But as I said before, and as Mariam said also, I agree with her, it's a question of education, it's a question of know-how, and it's a question of respect of different countries and culture and religion. And I'm very proud to be in that sort of panel, because it means that we can cross over opinions and being very aligned in all what we said. And I think that we should be very proud to be on that level of sharing. So of course, I fully agree with what you said both.
Okay, perfect.
One last question for Dr. Reem before we move on to the Q&A. Have you approached any global leading designers or brands, Dr. Reem, to gauge their interest in research about the heritage of this region and whether or not they would want to launch collections or capsules that encompass art and tradition from this part of the world?
Yes, we are in the process. We have to remember that the ZEI initiative is just 4 years old. We're so young compared to everybody else that's on that field. And the panel that you saw before us or before you, they've had a lifetime of work that to their credit. But I think, having said that, the ZEI initiative being part of the first expo in the Arab world is quite an achievement. To be able to have an exhibition within the Women's Pavilion, which is an empowering pavilion for all women, is also another achievement. And having Cartier as the sponsor for that pavilion is also a link to these big brands that we are trying to reach out to. So we are in the process, having the Shaloub Group here with us today, having you from Majid Al Futtaim Group, and so on and so forth. We are reaching out to you, and you are responding to us, which is a wonderful, wonderful situation. I'm very optimistic. We are at the beginning of the stage, the first steps of it, but I think this is very encouraging. And if anything, it will lead to this partnership that needs to take place between all these elements together in order to make sure we can achieve these goals. And without you, we cannot do it.
Thank you. Thank you. And you have all of our support because we are great believers in your initiative. And that's why we're here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Ben. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not quite sure what a guy in England with clearly no foot in the fashion world can contribute to this, but we'll see. we'll see. It strikes me that in the Gulf region that there's quite a good opportunity available, since there is a very strong traditional material culture that can be referred to, whereas in a lot of Western countries, in Europe, the connection with costume and clothing traditions is quite disparate. I mean, there isn't a strong tradition. If you ask me what are traditional English clothes, I couldn't tell you. I have no idea at all. My grandfather wore a suit. That's all I can tell you. But there is quite a strong link and quite a good opportunity to bring traditional costume and contemporary fashion together in a way that I don't think you could see in many other countries. However, one of the issues that you've all been pointing out is the people's exposure. I don't know in the Gulf region, if you wanted to know about regional costume or traditions, where would you go? In London, you do have some museums that you can go to. I know that the V&A has the fashion and textile centre that it goes to, the cloth workers, and they constantly have visits from people in the fashion, students from fashion, who are looking at historic costume and finding different sort of techniques, looking at embroidery or the way that linings were done or collars were done or even buttons and things like that. Is there a resource in the Gulf region that that could be used in this way?
I think it's a very good idea. I don't think we have this yet. They are much smaller if they exist. They are individual efforts. But I think many of the institutions and brands are beginning to take notice that this is lacking and it is in need, and they are trying to support us. So this is a wonderful way that we are being supported by. Of course, as you mentioned just now, if we look at the exhibitions that are taking place, the fashion ones, fashion-focused exhibitions that are taking place, be it at the Metropolitan Museum of Art with the collections that they've got, and the exhibitions that the yearly exhibitions that they do to support the Costume Institute there, and the V&A in England, they are the highest selling exhibits when they do take place. So people are very much interested in this format, in this medium. It's a matter of just taking charge and starting to work on it and develop it. So I am optimistic, and I think there are possibilities for us to grow.
One of the questions that came in from the earlier panel, and it's been reflected a little bit in some of the questions coming in now, is it relevant to have, or maybe there already are, pattern books? I mean, are there actual source guides and books about Arab costume and designs?
As far as the Palestinian heritage, we've got quite a lot. It's not enough, but it is there at least. And Widad Qawar, Dr. Gillian herself, and other scholars have really worked on this area, and they have managed to put down a body of work that is formidable. Maybe not as exact pattern books, but at least it has the costume, the history, the elements, even the embroidery, stitchings and names for them, and so on and so forth. But for the rest of the Arab world, I think we are still lacking, and there's so much work to be done. This is the challenge that we all are facing. You heard Sid Shahira speak about this. Gillian faces it on a daily basis. And the effort that took Al-Mansujat to produce the book, it's a formidable body of work that they have done. It took them almost 10, 15 years to produce. So it's not an easy endeavor, and not many institutions have the vision to continue for such a long time. And that is the other element that is a big challenge to the work that you do, the academic work that we do, because the results are not instantaneous. They take time, and they are behind the scenes. So people do not see the amount of hours and effort that it takes for us to produce one item on the digital archive. It takes almost 1 month to do work, go back and forth and question and understand and reiterate and rewrite and work on it. People don't see that. They only see the beautiful part, which is the imagery that is out there and the information up there. And it is that part that is not visible that requires a great deal of funding, and it requires a lot of effort.
I wanted to ask, this may be a really foolish question, but personally I'm interested. So I was going to ask Mariam. So in Western brands that are selling in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, if I was to go into the shops, is the merchandise that they're offering the same as one would find in other regions, or is it personalized? Is there adaptations?
So my first year of when I opened up my company over a decade ago, most of my work was basically telling brands, please do not make maxi versions of whatever you're making, because that's essentially what they were doing. It's funny because when it comes to Jeddah and Riyadh, Riyadh's a bit more conservative as a city. You would see that women there actually dress more openly, privately, again, because they're only mixing with other women. So they will wear the shorter dresses, the more décolletage showing, because they're only socializing with women. Whereas in Jeddah, the city I'm from, we tend to mix more. And because of that, we dress more modestly because we're going out as, let's say, couples. And so it's really interesting to see that the product offering is quite different depending on what city you're in. That being said, I think that so many amazing changes have happened, so with MAF and Shalhoub Group, they now have teams on the ground here. They now have people, their buyers aren't in a satellite office somewhere else, curating the collections for us anymore with what their idea of what we might dress like. Instead, they actually have sales staff here, stylists giving feedback on the ground. And I think that has really changed what you're seeing now in stores. And that's also helped us in terms of buying more locally, because before, shopping was something we did as we traveled. It was very much connected to that luxury world of I travel and then I shop. Whereas now you're seeing more people shopping locally. And the reason behind that, I think, is because they're finally catering to us.
So there are instances of sort of more capsule collections, things with a more sort of local, regionalized vocabulary in the patterns rather than just sizes and cuts.
No, I would say that the capsule collections are not so much about giving us a different offering. That's also just a selling technique, right? It's a marketing technique. You want to create this amazing capsule collection, like, Dior creates the Middle East golden collection, and now everyone wants to buy it because it's limited. But I think that works with anywhere around the world. But when you're talking about what's actually offered in the store and that curation, I always get the question asked, like, how do Khaliji women dress? And I'm like, just like you dress, except we have the abaya over it. But once we take that off, our ready to wear is quite similar. We want the same fashion trends that are on the runways. We are very up to date on what's happening in the fashion world, and that's what we wear. And here, especially, maybe more so than other countries, they have that disposable income to actually keep up with the trends. And so you see the women in this region very, very on trend with their fashion.
Is there a similar instance that I know, from the area that I work in, which is sort of more so than anything else, which is antique textiles, that there's a great interest, a surging interest in chintz, printed cottons in India, so historic ones. However, the wealthy Indian collectors are only interested in buying those textiles in London. They don't want to buy them in India because there's a cachet of bringing it back, so to speak.
And I think that's what's so amazing about this new generation is that mentality has shifted. And I have to tell you, it's not just to do with fashion. It's the fact that this generation is really proud of their country. I grew up in an era where I was always defending Saudi to my friends and that were expats or international kids. And now this generation is growing up with Middle East, with the Saudi Cup, with the, Vision 2030. So their mentality has completely shifted where it's like, yes, we are this very proud nation and we don't feel we need to be validated from the West. And I think where we're seeing that actually that mentality drip down into even our consumer behavior, where now it's like, actually, I want to shop locally. And again, I keep talking about COVID. I think I'm the only one still stuck on it. But with COVID, we also had this push to buy local and support local. And I think that also has really helped with this idea of let me buy things locally and no longer buy it, abroad. And I think it goes also to the authenticity, right? We feel that if we're buying it locally, it's more authentic than if we bought it abroad. Whereas I think our mothers and grandmothers, it's more like, oh, I went to London, I bought this amazing piece. So different kind of stories that this generation is telling versus the older generation.
To go take us back into something that we were talking about earlier in the first panel discussion. Richard, there was a question earlier that has been repeated a couple of times from someone who's Kurdish and wanted to know if there was information that they could get about Kurdish costume and material culture. And I know that this is an area that you have worked on a little bit, is it not?
Yes, I do quite a lot of work with Kurdish heritage, including costume. And I work with Della Murad, who's a Kurdish costume expert. I would recommend anyone who's interested in Kurdish culture and costume to look at the website Gulan, which is www.gulan.org.uk. and there's actually a section on that website that has some of my photographs of traditional Kurdish costume. I think that Kurdish heritage is obviously a very, very different set of circumstances to Saudi, and it faces its own challenges and has faced its own challenges. In fact, it's probably there's probably much less of it remaining than Saudi. But I would certainly recommend anyone interested to go to Gulen's website.
And another question in terms of talking about Arab fashion is, what are the online resources? Dr. Ring, could you tell us a little bit about what resources there are online connected to the ZAY initiative for people that want to find out more about Arab heritage?
We've got the digital archive on the ZAY initiative. We've got a blog that comes out once a week through the ZAY initiative. And we also have our webinars that take place every 2 weeks through the ZAY initiative, other than the exhibitions that we try to develop as we go along. You also have the center, Textile Research Center, and Dr. Gillian is involved in, and they also publish online. They have an archive. Dr. Gillian, 33,000, was it?
No, 36,000 textiles
36
now at the moment.
And growing, you know.
And growing rapidly.
All over the world, you know, and you write a blog every week as well on the topic. Granted, it is on the whole textile world rather than the Arab world. We focus only on the Arab world.
Yeah, we have actually about 3 blogs a week, quite deliberately, on a very diverse range of subjects. So sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's thematic, sometimes it's an object that's come in with an interesting story behind it. We also do online exhibitions, actual exhibitions, and what we're trying to increase at the moment is the teaching and setting up an artisan school, increasing courses, workshops, lectures, to promote knowledge of textiles, knowledge of clothing, regional, of different types, stressing teaching. Without the crafts, without this experience, there will be no future. Mm-hmm. And it's desperate at the moment. We've had in the Netherlands 3 generations who don't even know how to sew a button on. Mm. And so there are still the teachers who are now 75, 80, who can pass this knowledge on and are actively passing it on. But without preservation of knowledge, there is no future.
So true. Yeah.
I used to have a needlework class in my first school, strangely. I mean, I'm quite old, but not that old, but it was an anomaly. And I discovered when I went on to my secondary school that everyone was very surprised that I was doing needlework at the age of 6 in my school. Shireen, I just wanted to ask, I mean, I have not been to the Gulf, so I'm relatively ignorant about this, but on the work that you're involved with, how important and how does heritage play a role in the work that you do?
Okay,
and that's quite a broad question, but
yes, it is very broad indeed. But I'll tell you, I am a retailer, and I worked in retail for more than 25 years, and then I moved on to the real estate industry, and I'm now in shopping malls. But I'm a great believer in experiences, and especially that everyone is talking about it being the future of retail, and it indeed is. So infusing heritage in whatever we do in terms of retail formats can help in adding a layer of experience to any offer. That is one way. So we recently launched that concept store in Mall of the Emirates. It's a space of 4,500 square meters. And it is a place not only for selling objects, but we sell experiences and services. So we have food and beverage, we have a gym, we have organic laundry, we have beauty parlors, a barber, and many other sort of experiences like personalization and customization and what have you. Exhibiting or displaying pieces collected and curated by Zay, for example, in a place like that, which is a new format of retail, would be a very smart thing to do. And we have plans to collaborate with Zay going forward. For now, and for the 50th anniversary of the United Arab Emirates, we are collaborating with Zay on a shopping mall level. So we are very soon launching a UAE heritage space right in the middle of Mall of the Emirates on level 3. And this space, one of its components is going to be an exhibition by Zay for United Arab Emirates costumes. So we are great believers in heritage, and whichever channel we can find to collaborate with the likes of Zay or with Zay, because we know of Zay today in UAE, we do not spare that opportunity because it puts us on the cultural map. And we are sending a message to the world, a message that not many commercially interested entities would pay attention to, let's say.
Absolutely.
So that is what I have to say to your very broad question.
Yeah, well, no, and with a very specific answer and a specific space inside the mall for it. So that's pretty good. I wish that there was that sort of enlightened approach that we would see elsewhere. I mean, particularly in perhaps even in London, but
and Leiden.
And Leiden. I don't think it's going to happen though.
No. Unfortunately, please come to Leiden.
Well, we've reached the top of the hour, so we are finishing effectively. Thank you all very much for your engagement. I think we've had a busy afternoon, morning for some people, and I'd like to thank you all very much, particularly our panelists, Dr. Vogelsang Eastwood and Shirin El-Khatib, for their insights and their discussions and leading our two panels. And I'd also like to thank our audience, which who I can see from some of the names from all over the globe. So thank you all very much for attending and your observations and comments and questions throughout the last couple of hours. I'd also like to obviously thank the Zay Initiative for inviting me to come in and host the panels today. And I think it's been an example of one of the benefits, not that there have been many, of the COVID situation and the lockdown, is that it has meant that I've discovered things that I wasn't particularly aware of before. And the Zay Initiative and their work is a particular example of that, and something that I've enjoyed finding out more about, and I will hopefully bring into what I do in my day job with Harley Magazine and the work that we do here. So I hope that you will also join the Zay Initiative at some of the future symposiums that are going to be online, and more details will be released about these in early next year in 2022. And meanwhile, there's a chance for you to register for Zay Initiative's next webinar, which is on the 23rd of November at 8 p.m. Dubai time. And Dr. Reem will be in conversation with researcher and content creator Nicola Rice on dialogues on the art of Arab fashion, globalized bodies, how local and global forces are merging to create global fashion in the United Arab Emirates. You can also look online at the Zay Initiative's photographic exhibition, Draped in Heritage, at the Women's Pavilion at the Dubai Expo 2020. And so that from me and everyone else, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. If I may, thank you for this, and thank you on behalf of the Zay Initiative. I want to thank this fantastic panel, two panels that came together I want to thank all the speakers, and in particular Ben Evans of Hali magazine for his support and their support. Today we have merely scratched the surface, but I feel we have brought very important issues to light. Together with you, our community, we need to work to bring these to the forefront and ensure that the Arab heritage attire is saved for future generations. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your patience. And I welcome you to join us in our future programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you too.